Hey friends, this is Natalie Irvin, and welcome to the I See You podcast, where we explore how we can find significance in the unseen work of leaders and learn to be intentional to truly see others in our everyday lives. I can't wait to share with you, so let's get started. Today's scripture is from Isaiah 55, 8 and 9. For my thoughts are not your thoughts, nor are your ways my ways, declares the Lord. For as the heavens are higher than the earth, so are my ways higher than your ways, and my thoughts than your thoughts. Hey guys, and welcome again to the I See You podcast. This is our very first episode, and I'm so excited. This has been a long time coming. This is something we've been dreaming up for a while now and just never had the exact direction we wanted to go. But today we're here, and our hope is through highlighting leaders in our everyday lives, people who impact our lives in ways that are often unseen, that we would get the opportunity to highlight them and to really see them and to find out how they see others in their lives. And so I'm very excited. I hope that at the end of this that you will find things that are valuable and that you'll be able to apply some of these things to your own life. So today I'm so excited because I get to interview my therapist and my friend, Bre Carter. So, Bre, thank you so much for agreeing to do this for our very first episode. I know sometimes it can be a little bit intimidating, but you've enriched my life in so many ways. And so I'm just really honored to be able to have you here with me. It makes me feel more comfortable too. So tell me a little bit about your story.
Okay, my story. So I'm Bre Carter, or Brianna Morris Carter, is my legal name, government name. But I'm Bre Carter, and I came to Statesboro 16 years ago, followed a boy, my husband, Chad, back in 2007, and truly I followed him, I guess, in a sense. He was here, and we had started dating whenever I was in high school. High school was really rough, I would say. I had went through a lot, and I remember having a conversation with my guidance counselor, like my junior year, and she was like, your grades aren't even good enough to get into community college, which I wasn't really surprised by because I had been through so much. There was no way, knowing now just how your brain operates, that I could have, like, it's given me a lot of grace because there's no way I could have handled everything I went through and also, like, done well in school. So I worked really, really hard to pull my grades up my senior year. I think I graduated, like, middle of my graduating class. And she was right. I was not able to get into a four-year school, so I got into East Georgia, which my husband had told me about. And this question kept coming up of, like, what do you want to do with your life? And honestly, the only thing I ever knew that I wanted to do was to be a mom. So as a profession, I think, like, I went to OTC for a little bit. I changed my major so many times. I was going to do hair. I was going to do eye lens cutting. It was a lot. I changed my mind a lot. And so then after I got into Georgia Southern, after I graduated with my associates in education, and I had worked at a daycare all through college because I knew I loved to be around kids. Like I said, I wanted to be a mom. I really enjoyed my psychology classes a lot, or my philosophy classes, anything that helped me think and challenged me and grow, not math. That challenge I did not enjoy. So I just continued. I decided to change my major to psychology. However, I did not know that if you graduate with a bachelor's in psychology that you're not trained to do anything. You're just trained to go to more school. Yeah. And honestly, that was kind of a relief because I was like, getting really good grades at that point. I think I made president's list for the first time. I was really proud of myself, and I was like, I will continue to go to school. And we had a PsyD program, and at the time they were not accredited, and I was a research assistant for Dr. Knopfel. Shout out Dr. Knopfel. And she had one of the graduate students. I remember this conversation. They had just had like the walkthrough and they did not get approved. And that was really nerve-wracking for me because I forgot, I think it's like every 2 years they can apply for accreditation. And so that means that I would have, if they had never gotten their accreditation, which they did, I could have potentially graduated without a sealed diploma, and it would have been kind of useless. So I was like, well, I don't know what to do. And Erin Lawson, who was a graduate student, was like, overheard the conversation. She was like, I think you'd be like a great therapist, like a great counselor. And I was like, are you sure? Me? And she was like, yeah. And then she told me we had a counselor education program at Georgia Southern. And I was like, really? And she was like, yeah, in the education building. I was like, in the education building? That's so weird. So she looked it up. I remember she looked up like that they were humanistic. And I was like, what does that mean? She was like, they give hugs. And she helped me. You know, like, I was very discouraged, but she was super, like, which is just Erin, like, very encouraging. And she was like, no. She was like, I'll help you go get this. And she asked me interview questions, the whole thing. And so, I interviewed in a group interview and an individual interview. I got in, and here we are after...
Wow.
I mean, obviously it's longer than that,
Right.
but that's essentially like the origin story is someone, I mean, like me being insecure and someone believing me. And I always say I kind of fell into it because,
Yeah.
I mean, I did have direction. I was just kind of going with what called to me or what I enjoyed learning about, but I had no like actual sense of purpose. And so whenever Erin spoke that to me, I was like, would it hurt? You know, like, let's try it out. Yeah. And here I am. And I'm so thankful for her. And what's funny is, like, I've talked to Erin about this, and she doesn't see, one, she didn't even remember that moment at all until I recalled. And then also, like, she didn't see it like that at all. She just thought we were just having a conversation.
But she saw something new, and then that changed the trajectory of your life.
Yeah. And so
cool. And now here we are.
Here we are, yeah. And so today, you and I had a conversation about this and how this is kind of a big deal for you. I mean, it's a big deal for me. I'm not usually in front of the camera ever. I'm very much behind the scenes, but do you want to kind of talk about like why this is a big deal for you?
So one of the things that we're going to do today that's a little bit different from how our episodes will normally go is that we're going to do kind of a reverse interview. So Bre has been my therapist for a couple of years now, and she has seen a lot of things in me that I didn't see in myself. And so I want you to be able to see me before we go and highlight others and what we see in them. So she's going to kind of ask me some questions so that you all can get to know me a little bit better. So we're here kind of talking about how we got to this place. We were friends before, and then some things happened in life that we can go into, but you really saw or were able to see through a lot of my walls that I had built up, and we were able to work on a lot of things. And so, so this is, it's intimidating for me because I think
it's your fears realized.
It's my fears realized. I have a lot of insecurities. There's been a lot of conversation about doing a podcast, but I was scared and I felt like I didn't really have anything to offer. I didn't see the value in what I would share or what I would have to say. But it kept coming back to, seeing others be valued and how much joy that brought me when I was able to do that in my profession as a teacher, with my friends, just seeing things in them and just celebrating that really made me realize, like, that's what you did for me, and that when we do that for others, it moves them forward. It's a sense of encouragement, just like you were able to see things that I was going through that I couldn't put words to, that we can then do that for others as well, just in everyday life. And so I felt like, regardless of if I have 10 listeners or 1 million listeners, that just being able to have these conversations was valuable for people. And just, being able to hear that they're not alone in the things that they feel or things that they're going through.
I think there's also purpose in even just for you and I to be here together, in the sense of it is something that we've talked about for a while, that we both feel God put a desire in your heart to do, and how you see yourself or have seen yourself has really kind of gotten in the way of that calling, I feel, and also allowing God to use you in a lot of different ways. And how this is, like, if I think about therapeutically, a goal that you give me that you want to attain, and you asked me to do this, and of course it's out of my comfort zone, but I was like, whatever, sure, whatever I can do to help, because that is kind of what I feel my calling in life is, to be a helper, to be servant-hearted. But yeah, so I think that this in itself has purpose and is good. Tell me, if you don't mind, so everybody can know a little bit about who you are. Like, let's start, like, maybe little Natalie.
Little Natalie. Well, I'm still little, so 4'11". I haven't really overcome the smallness of stature, but
younger
smaller. Natalie. I was born in Kennesaw, Georgia, and grew up there. Well, I wasn't born in Kennesaw, Georgia. I was born in Florida. But obviously that time didn't mean much to me.
I'm like, did I get?
Wait a minute.
You didn't put that on your intake. How long were you in Florida?
So only 3 years, and we moved to Kennesaw when I was 3. So I was basically raised there my entire life. Had an awesome childhood. I mean, my parents, literally, their lives revolved around us. I mean, they did so much for me, and grew up in the faith. They took us to church every Sunday. I mean, really an ideal childhood. But I would say that there were elements of being misunderstood. I was pretty bossy, kind of sassy. But I also struggled a lot with anxiety from a young age. I remember when my dad used to travel a lot, and he had a beeper. And I remember just being so terrified that something was going to happen to my dad that I would call him nonstop or beep him, like SOS, or, there was an emergency, but there really wasn't. The emergency was in my mind. The emergency was, I don't want something bad to happen, so I'm going to keep calling to make sure you're okay. And I never, growing up, that continued in a lot of different situations in my life, but my thought was, I'm just being dramatic. A lot of people around me said, yeah, she's dramatic, and I'm not making excuses for dramatic behavior, because yes, there is some in my life that, it's teenager dramatics, but also there were real things going on in my brain that I did not have the words for.
And I think it's only dramatic if you compare it to something else more severe, right? So, like, if somebody comes to my office with, like, roommate problems, it would be easy to be like, oh my gosh, that's not a problem, or they're upset because they lost their driver's license or something. It's like, that's not a real problem.
Right.
But it is. It's that you, when you were little, were feeling that intense fear. That was not you being dramatic. That was appropriate to what your anxiety was kind of manifesting in you. The idea of something happening to your dad is very scary.
Right.
But as you have talked, and we have talked, a lot of what you picked up were labels that were had a twinge of negativity to them. Yes.
Yeah, and I think at that time, mental illness, mental health was not really something that people talked about as much. And I know that my dad struggled with mental health as well, and he would share that in his story. But, as I got through college, I really was always drawn to like leadership positions. And even when I didn't want to be the leader, it was almost like I was just thrown into it. And I felt so much purpose in that, to be able to lead and to be able to serve. But I think that anxiety, that fear, that insecurity, that negative self-talk was always there. And oftentimes I think it was so paralyzing that I missed out on opportunities because I was feeling like I'm not good enough. I can't do this. But I didn't have words to that. Like I just felt this like war inside of me that I could not describe. I couldn't like put words to. And so I just suppressed it, I think.
Or it became normalized, maybe.
It was just normal. It was a normal feeling.
Nobody told you that was like, there's a different way.
Problem.
Yeah,
like, there's a better way to live. You don't have
to be so mean to yourself,
Right, yeah. And, and I think, when we got married and started having kids, of course, that heightened to a whole nother level because, you don't even know what fear is like until you have children. And then you're like, oh my gosh. And, a huge part of our story is our daughter. Harper, she's 7. She started having seizures when she was a year old, and the first seizure happened on our anniversary. So that was great. And I feel like at that moment, like my life completely changed.
Right.
And my husband's. Like our lives were never the same after that.
Yeah.
And we thought, well, maybe it was just one. Maybe it was just one seizure. Well, one seizure turned into now 7 years of seizures.
And fear.
And
a lot of fear.
And, with hers are prolonged, or were. Luckily, thank God, praise God, she has not had one in over a year. But at one point, they were prolonged to the point where we were going to the hospital and we were riding in ambulances, and she was unresponsive for 30 minutes at a time. And like I can't describe what that feels like as a parent, because you're watching something happen to your child that is very traumatic to watch, but also just this like fear that I'm going to lose my child.
Yeah.
Like, what if, it's all these what ifs, like, and then you're given diagnosis after diagnosis, and it's just, everything kind of felt like a fight, like I felt like we were living in this fight or flight. Like we were always ready for the next emergency. Everything we did in our lives was centered around Harper and what was best for her.
You told me about Adeline, what she said when you said, what's most important. Was that? Yes. And Adeline said for Harper to not have another seizure.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So that just shows, when you're...
Adeline is your other child.
Yes. Adeline is
your other child.
Is the 4-year-old, and she holds her own. We'll definitely talk about her in many episodes to come, I'm sure. But even when you're 4-year-old or 3-year-old, however old she was at the time when she said that, she can pick up on that, then that means it is a central focus for our family. And I think, like, once we got the diagnosis, I felt like life's over.
Yeah.
Like, this is not what we wanted. This is not what we hoped for. God, why would you even allow this to happen to us? Like, what did we do? And I think, like, we knew that God was faithful, and we could see God's faithfulness in each step. And so we were recognizing that, and we were thanking him for that. And we were thanking him for, sustaining us and for giving us strength. But at the same time, we're like, but what's next?
Yeah. Yeah. And I think I recall the first time you sat on my couch, what you said. Do you want to tell? Do you remember what you said?
I don't remember.
Okay. I said, like I always do, like, what do we can either talk about something that you want to talk about, or I can make up something for us to do. You have a choice.
Yeah.
after I check in, but I was like, what do you want to talk about? And you were like, I just don't like myself. Like, I feel like I'm at the worst place I've ever been. I'm just sick of feeling this way. And really a lot of it, we had talked about just how your relationship with the idea that you were responsible for carrying a child, really intensified that anxiety. That something about you was then related to not doing a good enough job for Harper, or that you were going to misstep, or you were going to forget something, or that somehow you had some control over. Yes, which is a very anxious thought. And we talked about, I was like, she literally has a diagnosis. The probability that she will have another seizure is,
Right.
yeah, it's there. And you are working so hard to prevent that, in this idea that you have control over it instead of acceptance, and almost very shameful of like that you had failed her in some way.
Or that it was impending that I would.
Yes.
At some point.
Yeah, at some point.
And I remember you telling me, maybe it was in that same conversation, that like, Natalie, you aren't responsible for saving her. You're responsible for being her mom, and that you're not God.
Yeah.
And you can't be.
Yeah.
And I think that actually translates into a lot of areas of my life, not just with Harper, that like, I am not responsible for everybody's issues, everybody's happiness, everybody's whatever it might be.
Yeah.
And I have to come to terms with that, because it will weigh so heavily. So, I got involved with doing therapy regularly, and then also seeing a psychiatrist, because what we realized is that a lot of what I had suppressed was pretty big. Some trauma with PTSD from the things that we've gone through as a family, but then also the anxiety, which had always been, recognized. And then some OCD, because I was obsessing. I was really like, it was controlling my entire life.
Yeah. Well, a lot of what we talked about, I think it was our first or second session, I was like, I didn't want to put a label on anything, but this really does look like PTSD. And I remember you were so not wanting to connect with that, because you were like, well, like, I haven't been through half of what, like minimizing your experience, which is what you earlier stated you kind of did or had happened, dismissed when you were younger. So that's a learned behavior. But I was like, no, you saw your child have a seizure multiple times, hooked up to equipment, thought she was going to die, out of control, that you're not supposed to live through that and be okay.
Right.
That is very traumatic. And so then we talked about how trauma affects the brain, also you being predisposed to anxiety, OCD being a symptom of anxiety. And I think you talked about earlier, like me being able to see through your walls. I think it was more just me putting actual words to what you were going through, instead of allowing yourself to kind of dismiss yourself or minimize it, but still like feel bad, like it's not helpful.
Right.
It still is subscribing to the belief that you're still not getting that right,
Yeah. And I think those are things that, I still struggle with, and we work through during our sessions, is reframing our thoughts. And that has been the most helpful thing for me, is when I'm in a session and we're having a discussion and I revert back to minimizing or feeling responsible for things I'm not responsible for. You're like, let's reframe that.
Yeah.
And I love that, because I don't have the tools for that.
Yeah.
And I think, oftentimes leaders, especially people that are in leadership positions, want you to believe that they're competent, want you to believe they have things together. They want to take on a lot more than they can handle, because they want to portray this sense of like, yeah, I got that. Yeah, I'll do that for you. Absolutely. And at some point you get to a position where you're in kind of a hole. Like, you've taken on too much.
Yeah.
And if you don't have an outlet, to be able to express your fears, your thoughts, the fact that you are not as competent as you,
Well, you are competent, but you're not supposed to be doing it.
You're not as perfect.
Yeah. Or self-sufficiency.
Yeah. Self-sufficiency. Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think that being able to have an outlet is so important. And that's what I want people to see, I think, in our conversation, is that therapy is for anyone. That therapy is such an important step in your life when you feel like you can't put words to what you're feeling. That things are starting to feel overwhelming, that things are starting to feel out of control. And I know as leaders, we want to control everything, which is also an issue. But when the reality is we have zero control over anything in our lives.
Yeah, nothing will do that than watching your child have a seizure.
Right.
Put that in perspective, which we had a moment when my middle child, before Harper, was Harper born?
No.
Harper was not born.
Nope.
Okay. When Avery had her first seizure, and I was not there. She was with my parents. And we were doing youth group, and I don't remember the event, black shirts.
Yeah.
But, yes, my parents called me and told me that she was having a seizure, and I cried, and you and Christine Whittington prayed with me.
Yeah, and I remember telling John after that, so ironic, that like, oh my gosh, like if I was in Bre's situation and my child had a seizure, like I would just fall apart. Like I would not be able to handle it.
Yeah.
And then, lo and behold, here we go.
Yeah.
But I think
God was like, you know what? That's a great idea, Natalie, to test you with.
And in a way, I think through our relationship, I can see God's hand in so many things. And I think through our relationship, he was in a sense preparing me.
Yeah.
Because you did go through a lot with Avery. You did weather a lot of storms. And so when you and I met, I feel like you were able to connect with me on a different level because you did know our story.
Yeah.
You could understand. And I think oftentimes, like, you don't understand until you've been there.
Yeah.
But you can, empathize.
You can empathize.
And you can imagine what those things feel like.
Yeah.
And so...
One, also, like, it's, as moms, we've talked about that we go through 1,000 different traumas that our kids never experience.
Right.
Like we go to the store and I'm like, they're going to get hit by a car. They're going to run around and get kidnapped, and it's like, nothing happens. We have a great time. And they don't know internally I'm thinking all these things.
Right.
And a lot of when you get to a place where bad things do happen to people that you love, you do lose people that you love, you really do have to work on, I feel like, I really do not know how people do it without having a relationship with God, because I think you would only be bitter and terrified.
Absolutely.
And then try to keep your kids in a bubble, which would be, like the anxious attachment, all that stuff, like it's just seeds that grow bad things that would flourish where, and I think with Harper and her own stuff, that you were so good at advocating for her. And we've talked a lot about that, which also with therapy, like is important to advocate, like if you don't feel like you're with the right person, or don't try to force it. It's okay to try or try again. I'm sure people have dated hopefully more than one person. And if not, if that's not God's calling to you, then trust me when you can date other therapists, But yeah, I think with Harper's situation, you were able to effectively, because, and we've talked about this before, how like my kids have made me so much better, and like I may not do it for myself, but I'll do it for my kids, And so I think Harper going through her stuff allowed you to be confident in advocating for her, which we talked about. I was like, now we just got to like train that muscle to do it for you.
Yeah.
in a different sense of like just taking care of yourself or seeing yourself or being kind to yourself. Because like Harper flourished, and I feel like she's doing so well, unless you haven't told me otherwise.
No, she's doing
she's
really
doing
well.
great.
So one of the things that I just heard you say was how important it is for us to see ourselves. So from a counseling perspective, why is it important for us to be able to see our true selves?
Well, okay, so this will be from, I'll do two perspectives, like the counseling perspective, but also who is also happens to be a therapist perspective. Okay, so I think it's important, one, because how we see ourselves, one of my favorite therapists or theorist, psychologist is Carl Jung. And he has this idea of the shadow self, which we've talked about. Like there are these parts of ourselves that we don't want to accept, you know, that we don't want to look like. They're not scary or bad. They just hurt and make us sad sometimes, or they're shameful. And the idea is that until we kind of visit these and hold compassion and accept them, that is us, do we become actualized people. And in a way, I use that a lot about empowerment. I remember reading New Morning Mercies, and he reframed the story of David and Goliath and talking about our identity, and remembering who we were, and of course, like standing in the face of a giant, you know, what the reality of that's like. And I think about with you and Harper, how easy it is to just go into self-criticism. I'm not prepared. I'm not equipped. Why did God give me, you know, like I'm not the person to do this effectively.
Right.
And how that would get in the way of you being who you need to be for Harper, right? And I think it gets in the way of a lot of things, even if it was true. Like that's one of the things I say is like, even if this was a true statement about who you were, how is it helpful? How is it helping you to work from that point of view, that narrative, that story that you tell yourself? And I was talking to my mom in the car last night, and we had a conversation about how we see ourselves and identity. And I was talking about, like, a lot of times what we say is that we know better. You know, like that's what we're saying, but we don't realize it. You know, like if God gives you Harper and you're like, no, I think you got this wrong, Lord. I'm not sure you knew what you were doing here. Then you're saying that you know better than God, you know, and you're not. And the beauty is like, if it's done, then it does give you the freedom. I never understood what handing it over meant. I was like, but I pick it up like 5 seconds later, Lord. Like, I don't know what that means. It's just living in that in between of accepting that things are really hard, but allowing there to be grace for you to just live in knowing that you're not in control. You know, like you can just trust that He is going to take care, or that He has empowered you, filled you with the Spirit to be able to have discernment and all of the things. And so, you know, I think it would be helpful for you to kind of share how for you were able to get here where we're having this conversation with the cameras and
Yeah. You know, I think after we met several times, I was starting to see that a lot of the things I was feeling were not my fault, that it was a byproduct of things that I had gone through, and not knowing then how to reframe some of those critical thoughts that I was having, or to be able to walk through a panic attack, you know, like because I think you and the psychiatrist have given me tools in my toolbox. You know, I think that what's great about you is that we were able to talk about it in the context of our faith.
Right.
Because I think that therapy is great, but if we're not able to then align it with the truth of God's word,
Right.
then it's just a self-help. Mm-hmm. And
It's a Band-Aid.
It's a Band-Aid.
Yeah.
But true healing comes when we can surrender, like you were talking about, giving our situations to the Lord in those circumstances. And it's a day by day. I pick it back up. He reminds me to put it back down. And I think, with my identity, with my children, in my marriage, just in all aspects of my life, like learning to name it, name how I feel, accept it, and be okay with that in that moment. Yeah. I'm scared because of XYZ, and that's okay.
Right. It's okay.
But here's what God says in his word, and this is what we've talked about in therapy. So between God's word and therapy, I can then reframe how I'm feeling, and it doesn't always change in the moment. It's not like a magical, poof, you feel great again. It's
Well, you're able to live in the uncomfortable.
Right.
It's not terror.
It's not debilitating.
Yeah, it's not debilitating.
Yeah. And I think at this point, I've been able to live. Mm-hmm. And that's one of the things I told you was one of my goals in the session was I want to just live my life. Because because I wasn't living my life. It was very much nothing. Well, like there was no joy.
Yeah, and to be fair, I just want you to kind of talk about too how like that you work so hard to present the opposite.
Right.
Which is also a coping skill of trauma. It's either isolation. We've talked about that before. Mm-hmm. We've talked about, also masking. Mm-hmm. And that's why you're so exhausted and burnt out when you come home because you've put on
a face.
Yeah, a face in the sense of like, I have to do this to survive, right? Like I have to take on, and kids do that. Like I had a kiddo who had a hard time going to class the other day, and I told her I had this magical dress that takes away all your fear and anxiety and, will make you strong. And she put the dress on and she was like, oh my God, it worked. And she went to class and I think we do that. It can be helpful to a degree, but we're not supposed to live in that space.
Right.
Like if I'm having a hard day, like if, when my grandparents died recently, my grandmother died the day before the first day of pre-planning. And, I was like, today's going to be hard. But I think it's that grace of like, I'm not a bad grandchild for going to work. Mm-hmm. I'm going to grieve. I will be honest with people. Mm-hmm. Maybe I'm too honest sometimes, but I'll be like, my grandma just died, so like, you're going to have to bear with me. Mm-hmm. And it does kind of cause like, well, how are you here? Yeah. But there is that sense of like knowing what you can do and what you can't do, masking if you absolutely have to, but not living there.
Right.
And I think you had lived, when we had seen it, you were living there.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it was like killing me.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, like your birthday was coming up, and I remember you were like, I'm not even looking forward to my birthday.
Yeah, and I think that's what I told my husband is like, when I realized things were really, really bad is when I didn't have joy for the things that should
be joyful.
Be joyful.
Yeah.
And one of the things, we booked a Disney cruise, and that's literally the happiest thing on earth, right? According to Disney.
And me. Yeah, I love Disney.
And you love Disney. But I was like...
you did not want to go.
I didn't want to go. And it took several sessions for me to feel like I can do this.
I mean, even you and John going on dates was tough.
Yeah, we didn't go anywhere.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so taking steps, like going on that cruise was big. And I remember when we were sailing off, we were both freaking out.
Yeah.
Like, what did we just do? But then it was the best experience that we could have done. And God just like opened our eyes to, you don't have to stop living your life. Like you can live and you can thrive in the midst of
circumstances.
Yeah,
suffering. Yeah, I think we've talked about that, about like sometimes it's not about avoiding suffering. It's just learning how to suffer well, suffer in a way that you can know that you didn't dishonor yourself or God, or do something shameful, and then that's okay, you know? And it is okay to not be okay. It's okay not to have all the answers. It's okay if your child asks you something to be like, I don't know.
Yeah.
I do not know. But yeah, I think for you, like what you just described, we were so scared as we were sailing away. You know, your psychiatrist and I would both say that's re-traumatization happening, that your body does so much to try to protect us, right?
Yeah.
But we get it wrong. Things get miswired.
Yeah.
And that grounding, that practice of being able to reframe, to be present. Sometimes I'll have clients and I'll say, tell me, you know, like if I can tell they are going back to a place, they'll tell me what's different now about where you are. And we've done that before than then. And once you start naming them, you start to calm down, you know?
Absolutely.
Because it allows you to realize that you're not there. And I think the moment you kept going back to specifically was a very, very scary moment.
Yeah.
And you were having flashbacks, and that's torture.
It really is. And I would explain it like a war. That's what it feels like in your mind.
Yeah.
That you're like, why does this keep happening to me? Like, this is killing me.
Well, it felt like it never stopped.
It felt like it never stopped. And now I can say through therapy, through the right medication, which I think is also important. Like I'm not saying that everybody needs to be on medication, but there's a time and place for that. And if it's helpful, then, you know, to help you live your life, then that's important. And I think through both of those things in tandem, like I don't have flashbacks anymore. I can sleep peacefully at night. I can put down a lot of fear and a lot of bitterness and anger that I'd had before. And I can be present as Harper's mom and Adeline's mom and not be terrified all the time.
Yeah, and we even talked about the summers were really scary.
Yeah. And summer's scary because heat is a trigger for Harper. And so I dread the summers and I hate summer. And I told you that. And you're like, whoa, we need to pedal back here. And so we made a plan. And we made a plan that, okay, so what can you do? Let's not talk about what we can't do. Let's talk about what we can do.
Or compare to others.
Right.
Right. And what their version of fun is.
Right. And Harper's just amazing. She's so simple. And her playing with mom at the house is
Her
great.
favorite.
That's her favorite. She doesn't care about all the big things. But we were able to spend this summer inviting people into our home, inviting her friends into our space. And it was amazing. Like we had so much fun. She had a great summer. I had a great summer.
Yeah.
You know, we didn't focus on the things that we couldn't do, but we did take steps to do things that at one point might have been scary for me.
Yeah.
And I think that's all part of it is just taking little steps each day.
Making your goals a lot smaller, we've talked about.
Yeah.
But also, I think what you said is so symbolic of what you're doing today, which is, you said, inviting people into our home was so rewarding.
Right.
I think by you sharing, because when you first presented this idea of the podcast, I was, which we had talked, I mean, you doing a podcast makes a lot of sense in a lot of ways. But like when you told me the theory behind it and that you wanted to interview me, I was like, well, I'm going to say something you're not probably going to like, that I think that I should probably interview you first. Because your testimony, your life has worth and is filled with so much that people need to hear, and value. So I think this is symbolic of that, what you did over the summer by inviting people into your home. You're also allowing people to see you.
Yeah. And we're literally in my home. So we are inviting the listeners in. So as we wrap up today, thank you so much, by the way, for just everything, for being here, for being willing, for just seeing me. So I want to ask you one more question about how you have felt seen recently.
Okay. Recently. I think Okay, so I said earlier that I never knew what I wanted to be when I was growing up, except for mom. And talking about being dramatic and having anxiety, I remember being in high school and crying because I was like, I'm never going to have children because I'm such a horrible person and I'm so bad, and God's going to like, it's what I want. Nothing more is to have kids, but like I'm not going to be able to have it, and I just know it. I know nothing.
Right,
You
you
know,
have 3.
yeah, I have 3. Well, yes, and technically I have 5 because my first, which was also
Right.
for that. That was also adding to the confirmation of my fears when I was first pregnant with twins and I lost them. And that was a horrible experience. And I remember being like, I told you, it's not meant to have kids. This is my fault,
Yeah, it's horrible.
Yeah, and so then Morris came along, and he is copy and paste of me. Avery came along, and she is just so beautiful and magical and all the things. And then Darcy came through worship at Connection. God, I thought we were done having kids, and I remember God just told me, so clearly that we need to have another child. And so when we got in the car, I told Chad, he was like, God did not tell me that. And I said, well, just, if you'll spend some time in prayer over it. I was like, obviously, I need your permission to do this.
Right.
And he did, and he came back and he said that God was telling him the same thing. And Darcy's they're all 3 incredible. I'm so blessed. Like, if nothing else in this life could get better than just having them,
And
but
your kids seeing you, the best parts of you.
Yes. So recently, I burned everything down, and took a different job and changing houses and all the things. But really it was for them to have better experience, but also I could not pass up just the opportunity to be with the kids every day.
Yeah.
And so with that, I'm not a school counselor, but now I am a school counselor. And I have to, the idea of having so many little ones, just be gifted to me. And the way that I feel that I've been seen or validated, I guess, is, oh my God, they give the best hugs. And they're like, Miss Bre. And it is the best feeling ever. And it always catches me off guard. I'm never, ever anticipating to be tackled walking to go check my mail by a bunch of 4-year-olds. But it's the best thing. Yeah. Actually, that did happen, and then I got sick. Like, I got congested and stuff, and I was like, it's fine. It was worth
the
it.
Hugs are worth
They're
everything.
worth it. But I recently did, my first guided lesson. And I remember being a little nervous, but I told the kids that, I'm not a teacher, but we're going to go with it because it's important to try things even if they're hard. And I was like, as long as we can have fun. And I know that, I can make fun of myself and have a good time. And I think it went well, but Morris told me, he was like, Mom, you're doing such a good job. He was like, all the kids think you're so cool, and they think your office is cool. And Avery kind of said the same thing, and so it was that made me feel really good.
Yeah, that's so good.
Yeah.
Well, thank you for being here.
You're welcome.
It's been great. So we will continue to have conversations and episodes where we seek to see and highlight something special within different people in my life that I want you to hear from. And so each episode will be unique and different, and so we can't wait to see you next episode.